Today we're going to talk about the Flood cure, whether one has ever been attempted and whether it's even possible given the Flood's method of infection. So long ago, before the humanity that we know of, there existed ancient humanity. At the same time, there existed the Forerunners. Now, to cut an incredibly long story short, the first ever Flood outbreak occurred in ancient humanity-controlled space, and as they began to infect planet after planet, they were forced to retreat into Forerunner-controlled space, something that the Forerunners saw as an act of war, being that they were totally ignorant of the Flood's existence and the fact that humanity were literally running from the Flood, and the Forerunners proceeded to wipe ancient humanity out. However, during this war and during humanity's retreat, when times were as desperate as ever, human leaders enacted a pretty inhumane plan to try and stop the Flood. They genetically engineered a third of the remaining population of humanity so that they carried a special, unique set of genes that were believed to be able to counteract Flood infection, and then they sent this 33% off to be infected by the Flood. This was supposedly successful. When the genes came into contact with Flood DNA, it broke it down, which ultimately drove the Flood force attacking the ancient humans away.
Wow.
At least for now. Sadly, they were still locked into a war with the Forerunners, a war that should have never been started, who, as I said at the very beginning, ended up winning, but this cure wouldn't be passed into the Forerunners' possession. Instead, the humans destroyed it to intentionally fuck the Forerunners for if the Flood were to return in the future, which was going to happen. So, even though the Flood ended up causing everything in the galaxy to die by the hands of the Forerunners, and the cure itself being destroyed, humanity may have had a working cure in their hands. That, or they tried to sacrifice a third of the population as bait, so the other 2/3 could run away from the Flood. At the end of the day, it really depends if you're a glass half full or glass half empty type of guy. However, the Primordial, who was the last known precursor, who, if you don't know, are essentially the Flood, confirmed later that the Flood chose to retreat and instead weren't forced to by this cure, as it wasn't humanity's time to be tested by them. Although there is one thing to keep in mind, you can't trust everything the Primordial said because it was known to lie at certain points, so take this with a grain of salt.
Makes sense.
So that was ancient humanity's solution. What about the Forerunners? Well, they never had a cure per se, but they did have countermeasures, the most important of which being composition. Now, composition is the process of extracting one's consciousness and storing it in a digital form, and was attempted on victims of the Flood. However, it wasn't effective, as the infection could easily just continue to spread. Various different methods were attempted by the Forerunners by the master builder Faber, who led the charge to find some sort of cure or actual effective countermeasure. He did so by conducting sick and twisted experiments on ancient humans on Installation 07, in a number of Flood research facilities that ultimately became known as the Palace of Pain. Quite aptly named. As you can expect, nothing concrete was ever found, but eventually the composer would be used to turn ancient humans into Prometheans, which acted as uninfectable warriors built purely to stop the Flood. Quite ironic now how in Halo they are fighting their ancestors. Pretty weird turn of events. Okay, so now we've covered two ancient possible cures, but how about humanity, modern humanity? Well, before the Spartan 2 program existed, there existed the Orion project. Think of this as a sort of beta for the Sparta program, because it was where neurological modifications were first toyed with. A consequence of these procedures was a messed up, yet somehow still intact nervous system for the people that underwent the procedures, one of which was Sergeant Johnson. Now, I've already done a video on this, but I'll cover it again just a little bit here today. Basically, this messed up nervous system makes it not impossible, but far more difficult for an infection form to tap into the nervous system and take control of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Making the infection process a lot harder. This tends to make infection forms avoid targets that have this neurological change, because they would rather infect something that goes down easily than something that they'd really have to work at.
Yeah,
now,
makes sense.
With this in mind, you might be thinking, oh, easy peasy, just give the entirety of humanity these seemingly harmless neurological modifications, and we'll be Gucci. The Flood can't touch us ever again. Well, sadly, it ain't that easy. As much as we wish it was, it's really not.
Yeah.
Not only would this cost an insurmountable amount of money to do, be extremely inhumane and difficult, it would completely fuck up humanity as a species. Now, the reason for this is that many Orion Project washouts were discharged from the military for mental instabilities caused by these modifications.
Mm-hmm.
As you'd expect, neurological modifications tend to fuck with your brain, and many also died, so just imagine putting the entire human race under these conditions. It likely wouldn't have a positive outcome, even if it did give us a temporary immunity to the Flood.
Yeah.
And it's worth remembering that it's actually not an immunity. It just makes it a lot harder for them to infect us, but if it's going to be a lot harder for everyone to get infected, they're not going to start to avoid those that have the neurological changes, because everyone's got them. So
Yeah.
we're back to square one. Nothing changes. So, given what we know about the Flood and these various cures in inverted commas, is a cure actually possible? Well, we can't say anything for certain, considering the Flood are essentially the precursors, who can basically do what they want, really. And that's not within reason. They're essentially the demigods of the universe. They can do whatever they want. But we can speculate. Now,
You look
given
gross.
the Flood can only infect hosts with a nervous system, they can't infect Huragok for that exact reason, there's two ways that my scientifically lacking brain can think of that would stop the Flood. Either find a way to shield the nervous system from foreign infections, or completely conceal it. Now, I kid you not, I have legit scoured the internet for anything like this that exists in real life, that maybe prevents things like parasitic worms and infections that target the nervous system from doing so. But from what little I was able to understand from highly complicated, incredibly long PubMed articles, nothing like this really exists. But if it's any consolation, we shouldn't encounter the Flood in real life for about another 500 years, so got a little bit of time left to do some planning and maybe try and work some stuff out. That, or we could just make the entirety of humanity undergo Orion Project-like neurological alterations, and hedge our bets with a lady luck that we don't go full grayscale, and get doomed to a soon-to-happen inevitable death. But don't forget that these alterations aren't immunities, they just make it a lot harder for you to be infected, but if it's harder for everyone to be infected, then surely everyone's on an equal playing field. So, to be honest, this probably isn't the best way to go.
That is like pretty insane. About like if a cure was like actually possible. Like if a cure was actually possible, I feel like humanity, especially like present day, infinite present day, you know, I feel like they would have found a cure, or at least some semblance of a cure that is like on like a trial basis, you know, or like a trial run. But we don't know if the Flood is even alive in Halo Infinite time frame. So yeah, so we don't even know if they're alive. We don't really know then if we actually really need a cure, because nothing's actually been said if the Flood is actually back from Halo 3. I do remember watching that video about Johnson and how it is harder for him and others like him to be infected by the Flood. It's not impossible, though it is harder for the Flood to infect. And it does make sense for the Flood to want to take control over a host that is easily going to be taken down, whereas with Johnson or Chief or the rest of Blue Team, watching all of these Halo lore videos makes me want to just go play all of the Halo campaigns. I might do that.